So we're here at South by
in
Austin. You're from here.
I am. Yeah.
And what does it mean being in Austin, South by? How many times have you been?
So this will be my second year doing South by. I did South by last year. So I worked with Do the Work, Graham Nolan. We put together like the first unofficial guide to LGBTQIA sessions at South by last year. And so, I went and I attended every single queer-led panel that I could get into last year. And then this year will be my second year doing South by events. So
amazing.
Yeah.
And what does it mean, like being able to represent the LGBTQI community and be a part of this in your city you live in?
So what's great about living in Austin, right? We're in this kind of liberal hub of Texas. I don't have any issues of safety. I feel very safe being here, being queer, being a parent to a queer child. What South by Southwest and the challenge that we're trying to really amplify with South by Southwest is increased representation. So we created the second unofficial guide this year. And we did some analysis, year-over-year analysis, and we found that there was a significant decrease in the number of panels that are being available at South by Southwest this year around queer ideas and queer experience. So being here at South by Southwest allows me the opportunity to actually represent the community in a way that, it may not be represented as much as we'd like, at the panels this year, but also gives me the opportunity to amplify those voices and to also call out on people to say like, hey, we're here, we exist, we're part of the industry, we're part of the space, we've got great ideas, talk to us and let us share our knowledge and our POV and then let's work together collectively to try to advance that, especially in a space like Texas and overall in this country where there's so much legislation that's being put into place to squash our ability to just be able to have access to healthcare and to be able to have access to opportunities or to even feel safe in situations where DEIBA is being shut down at colleges and universities and some organizations. So, it's incredibly important to be here and represent the community. So I appreciate it.
I just got chills that it really means so much, like being also a part of the LGBTQ+IA community. Like it speaks volumes for what you're doing in the community and also in the ad tech and ad industry.
Yeah.
You mentioned a term, DEIBA. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means? Because that's a little bit of a newer term, for me at least, and I think a lot of people within the industry.
So first we have to sit down and talk about what is being communicated about DEI, right? At a global perspective, a national perspective. You've got political forces who are sitting there and squashing DEI, and they're perpetuating hateful rhetoric around what DEI is and not actually looking into what the acronyms are and what they actually mean. So the way that I think about DEI, and I add on BA because, there's that component to it as well. It's a holistic experience. And when you start with D, which is diversity, you can build upon into equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility. So diversity, when we work in spaces, and I'm sure you've probably heard it, the thing that leadership likes to say is we're all one big happy family, right? But families are oftentimes homogeneous, right? They have a similar lived experience, similar ethnicity, race, socioeconomic status, all of these things, okay? And they're also oftentimes pretty dysfunctional. And so when you go into a space, a working space, and you say, hey, we're one big happy family, what you're actually doing is you're creating a space where diversity is non-existent. So the call to action there is to step away from this family mentality and to start looking at it from a community perspective. And that's all the D and diversity stands for, is seeing your workforce as a community. And a community involves people from so many different backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, race, sexual, orientation, gender, all of those things, language, everything. And once you do that and you start seeing organizations as communities, then that breeds into the following stuff, which is equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility. So here I have this organization and it's community driven. And what I'm saying is I see you as your authentic self. You're this person who's coming to me and you have all of these amazing qualities about you, and that's what makes you special. And then now what I want to do is I want to make that space equitable for you. And so equity, and this is where it gets really convoluted in political spaces, is they say equity and what they're actually talking about is equality. And what we're not asking for equality, we're not asking for being treated equally. Mm-hmm. We're asking for equity, which is we're asking to be treated fairly. We're asking to be able to have access to the exact same opportunities regardless of who I am as a person. And so, one of my biggest harps is about the paper ceiling, right? The paper ceiling, it's you have to have a 4-year degree and you have to have all of these years of experience just to get an entry-level job. And that's insane. It's absolutely insane. Yeah. With the cost of education being what it is, with inflation being what it is, when you've got situations like myself where you're a single parent to a high needs kid and you're not going to be able to afford to put your kid through a 4-year college, how can I create these organizations that are going to allow these diverse people to have the same opportunity of entrance into these positions that would then allow them to be able to give their diverse and unique perspectives because they matter just as much. So that's where equity comes into place. And it also comes into place with pay. So I'm a woman. I know for a fact that there are men in my organization who make more than me, have the same title as me, and less years of experience than me. So equity is about treating people as they are from an experience perspective and saying like, okay, I'm not going to pay Deleyla less because she's a woman. I'm not even going to look at that. I'm going to look at how many years of experience does she have and the title, and I'm going to pay her equitably to her counterparts. So that's another part of equity is just making sure that there's fairness across the board in terms of compensation and benefits and all of these things. So you build off of that, and then that's where we get into inclusion. So if you have an organization that's rooted in diversity and then rooted in equitability, inclusion is a byproduct. Because now here I am, I have psychological safety, I have emotional safety, I have mental safety, and I have physical safety because I know I can bring my authentic self into the space. I know that I'm going to be treated fairly and have access to opportunities fairly, regardless of who I am and where I've come from. And that's going to make me feel included, right? So that's the DEI portion of it. The B is the byproduct of inclusion. It's belonging. It's saying, I can come into this space and know that I belong. So a great example of this is when I started at GSD&M, my first day, they were like, hey, we're going to bring you lunch. And I was like, cool, I love free lunch. And then they brought Pizza Hut. And I was like, hey, do you have a gluten-free pizza? And they were like, no, you didn't tell us that you had dietary restrictions. Well, see, if you had an organization that was rooted in diversity, equity, and inclusion, you would have had a process to ask. Exactly. And so what Keisha did, she's our chief DEI officer, she recognized, holy guacamole, this is a miss. So she sat me down and she was like, I don't want what happened to you to happen ever again. Can you help me put together a food intolerance survey, allergy survey, sensitivity survey to disseminate to the organization for our current employees and any future employees? Because I want to make sure that everyone feels included. Because if they feel included, they'll attend events. And if they attend events, they'll feel like they belong. And we launched the survey and it was something like 67% of the workforce responded with, I have a dietary preference, I have a dietary allergy, intolerance, sensitivity, all of those things. This is amazing. I've never felt included in any event since I've started working here.
Yeah.
And then now every single event that we have, we've got labels in place for allergies. We've got all these different drink, options, all these different food options, which is great because now you've got full attendance, whereas before it was like 20% attendance.
Yeah.
And that's really about what belonging is saying like,
sure,
hey, you've created this really safe space for me, and now I feel like I can step into it and I belong.
Yeah.
And then the accessibility portion is making it so every part of your job is accessible to you regardless of your disability, right? So I have ADHD. I worked with my employer, got my ADA accommodations, because when I started, I was like, hey, there's so many systems here that just don't work for me personally. And I need some help making it accessible to me. Yeah. Sat down with my employers and I said, hey, like this is what I need. Can you accommodate me in this way? And they're like, absolutely. And what ended up happening is in accommodating me, all these processes changed. And then my colleagues were like, this is great. And it's like, oh, so you might be a little neurospicy too. So that's really all it is. It's not about, pitting people against each other or pitting communities against each other. It's actually about how can we create this really beautiful communal space that is safe for people to then come in and bring their holistic selves. Because once they do that, then the work that we do in advertising, we'll have teams that are diverse. Exactly. We'll have teams that represent multiple intersections of reality. We'll have brand strategies and executions that are far more intentional and less performative, because we all know, we've seen those ads where it was very clear that a cisgender white man put together an ad to be, performative and inclusive. And you're like, yep, that totally missed the mark.
Yeah.
That won't happen if you have organizations that are rooted in DEIBA.
Yeah. And it sounds like you have a real sense of belonging and safety at GSD&M.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
What does that feel like, and how did you guys get there? What about the organization, or what are you doing inside those walls that are making it be this awesome, inclusive space?
Yeah. So it really, I have to toot the horn of my boss, Evan Walker. I really, really have to. And I think this is incredibly important, especially when you are a white, cisgendered, neurotypical male and you are in a position of leadership, okay? Oftentimes, we see these positions, we see these people, and they're not giving opportunities for people to amplify voices of other people, right? So Evan, here he is, and I come onto the space with him, mm-hmm. and he, at the beginning, it was clear he was like, I'm not entirely sure yet how to make it with Deleyla, like what this is going to look like. Mm-hmm. But he was curious, and the curiosity is what formed this safety, where it was like asking me questions of like, how can I help you? Like, how can I make this more inclusive for you? What are the things that you're struggling with, and how can we find these solutions for you? So with Evan, with my ADHD, for example, we have these like meetings where it's vendors and clients together, and I have a really hard time sitting still. I mean, I've moved a little bit here, but I have a very hard time sitting still. And if I'm sitting still, actually, I'm not paying attention. So me moving is actually my way of being able to process everything that is happening in this space. So we had this vendor meeting, did not go well, because I was expected to have my laptop down. I was expected to sit very still and listen, very consciously. And it didn't go well. And afterwards, he was like, hey, you're great. We didn't hear anything from you today. What happened? And I told him, I was like, I didn't feel comfortable. I lacked comfort. And here are the reasons why I lacked comfort. I needed something to be able to move my hands and my body. I needed you to pass things to me so I could feel safe, because I was the only female in the room. And I needed you to say like, hey, Deleyla's got this great idea. Let her go ahead and speak to it. And Evan took that information and was like, I can do that. And he's done that ever since then. So the next vendor meeting we had, he was like, okay, you're going to be in charge of flipping the slides and all this other stuff, which was great. Gave me something to do, which then allowed me to like really participate and engage. And then, we'll be in vendor meetings. Someone will mispronounce my name and he'll be like, hold on, I need to stop you before we can go on. Her name is Deleyla. And I want to make sure that you're, addressing her by her name, which is Deleyla. And then we'll be in meetings and he'll say, I'm going to defer to Deleyla here. Or Deleyla's got this great idea. I'd love for her to have an opportunity to talk about it. So having these bosses who recognize their privilege in a space and recognize that they have team members who come from marginalized, backgrounds or systems, and saying they've got a voice and I'm going to use my power in this room to amplify their voice. That's what creates that emotional safety. And that's what makes working at GSD&M better than any organization that I worked for in my, 10, 12 years career thus far. Yeah, it's fantastic.
It's kind of shifting gears a bit and getting more into kind of how you let the, DE and IBA shine through from the organization onto the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah.
Right? What is, say, the single-handedly most important thing you feel that you've put out there on the brands you work on that has allowed that to shine through for the brand you work on?
Yeah, I mean, we actually just had this conversation about like, what is GSD&M, right? Mm-hmm. And the brands that we work on, what do they represent? And really at the end of the day, they represent just the American person, right? So, we have a brand like Southwest Airlines, and you have Southwest Airlines. These are accessible, affordable plane tickets that have the ability to, if you need to last minute cancel, we'll give you a credit so that you can use it again.
Right.
We need that, right? If we want to be able to go on a trip and the cost of travel is so expensive, we need airlines that allow us the ability to do that.
Yeah.
Fruit of the Loom. Underwear, like we take it for granted. Yeah. But comfortable underwear that looks nice and that is at a proper like cost point for the average American is incredibly important. So working with our brands to say like, hey, like how can we make sure that we're reaching all of the audiences and letting them know that we have these products available for you that meet your unique needs, regardless of where you are in your lifestyle, right? Whether you're traveling and you've got to figure out how many pairs of underwear that you need to travel with, or, whether you're working out, so on and so forth. Like we want to meet you where you are and give that to you. And then we have clients, discount retailers where you want to be able to look nice, but you can't afford to go to, a Nordstrom or a Madewell directly in store. So maybe you go to a discount retailer that allows you to get access to name brands so that you can still look nice and you can still feel really good in your body. You can still show up to work and not feel like, hey, someone's going to notice that I'm wearing, XYZ clothing that's not necessarily on my level, right? So it's really about understanding the American consumer and then having these brands that we represent do the work to show like, hey, here we are and we're making these products that are accessible to you, that are catered to you, that are what you want and what you need, and using the data from the activations and having really wonderful activations like Channel Factory, where we're able to meet our audience exactly where they are and then see that lift in brand recognition, purchase intent, purchase consideration, brand affinity, see those results, those data-driven results, and then use those data-driven results to then inform, hey, okay, this didn't work. Let's go talk to our panels. Let's go out and do our focus groups. And let's see, like, how can we cater our advertising and our products to actually meet the needs of our consumers in a more intentional and less performative way. The other caveat to that, and this is where I think it's incredibly crucial to have a chief DEI officer in every single agency, is you have seen someone like Keisha who will sit down with brands and they'll say, hey, we want to do a post for Black History Month. And she'll be like, okay, I hear you. What are you doing infrastructurally to support your Black employees? Who do you have in leadership? Like, how are you supporting your
like,
home?
let's look inside.
Let's look inside.
Before we go outside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what's great, because then we have conversations that may seem uncomfortable, but they're all towards growth of our brands and their organizations. Mm-hmm. And that's where having a chief DEI officer who can hold these conversations accountable is so crucial, because then GSD&M says, look, we're not going to put out advertising that's performative. We're going to put out advertising that's intentional, that meets the consumer that we know we have. And we're not going to try to say, oh yeah, we've made a product for XYZ person just to get their dollar, right? Whether it's June for the pink dollar, whether it's Black History Month, whether it's Hispanic Heritage Month, we're not going to do that unless you as an organization foundationally are doing the work inside and then extending that into the community with your community efforts to support those, audiences that you're trying to actually reach.
I think probably so incredible for the organization as a whole, and then also allowing, the employees to feel safe, but then that all shining through in your media activations, which is crucial.
Yeah. And I mean, they take it a step further. Derica Sims put together this fantastic training on DEIBA for every employee. So it's not just, oh, we have a chief DEI officer and it's her job. Yeah. No, it's every employee's job to be trained in DEIBA, to understand DEIBA, to use that to manage their employees, to use that lens through how they're putting brand strategy together, how they're, interacting with the clients, how they're putting these activations together. They've taken it a step further where it's DEIBA is not just for one, it's for all of us to really know and to practice on a daily basis.
With, inside GSD&M, I know there's a lot of work that is being done within the DEIBA sector. Outside of GSD&M, kind of more in your personal life, what are the organizations that you're involved in supporting and you feel are meaningful for not only media, but the, D and IBA community as a whole?
Yeah. So last year when I was going through my job transition, I started a collective, Power Numbers Collective, and it started as it's a nonprofit, and it's really focused in on developing line level employees. So here's what happens. You're a line level employee, you start off as, let's say, a programmatic campaign manager, you get into senior programmatic campaign manager, and then you become a supervisor. But how often do people get into management level positions with no management level experience? And so what I wanted to do was really focus in on creating a space where I could mentor and teach people who are in these line level positions as, entry level or senior entry level prior to management, or entry level management, work with them individually to discuss like, hey, how are we going to create emotional safety? How are we going to create psychological safety, mental safety? What are the things that you're going to do to provide intentional one-on-ones? What kinds of growth plans are you going to create, not only for yourself and your team, but for each of them individually? And how are you going to advance your practice that way? So I really have focused in on, and I've taken on these, mentees who come from all different.
How do they hear about it?
Well, a couple of ways. So one, I work with Omni Women as a holistic level, and I've got 3 women in my org that work at 3 different agencies, and they're wanting to move into management level positions. So I'm able to then go through and guide them. We have a monthly 1-hour session where we go through and talk about all of the different things that will help them get to the point where they're going to feel comfortable becoming managers of teams that then create legacies of even better managers after them, right? So that's one way of doing it. Another way is through the work that I've done over at UT. So I've done guest lecturing, I've done panel work over at UT. I'm connected with the Dapper organization over there. So I have a lot of UT students that I mentor.
One of which now works at Channel Factory.
Yeah, exactly. I have a lot of these students who come to me and they're like, hey, you represent so much of myself, right? You are, I'm Persian, you are queer, you are someone who comes from not an advertising degree background. My degree is in linguistics and speech language pathology, so I'm learning myself.
Yeah.
You represent all of these different things. I want to learn how to not only get into this space, but like, how can I set myself up to be a mentor for other people as well? And so I have these like individual mentorship groups. And then within the organization, I've had a number of employees who are wanting to move into management level roles or just moved into management level roles, who will come to me and say, can I have a one-on-one with you on a regular basis and talk to you about, you know, here are the things that I'm struggling with. How can I do this better, or what can I learn, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of like all over the place a little bit. And then it's usually word of mouth. Sometimes someone will say like, hey, you should really talk to Deleyla. I got this experience from her. I learned a lot. I think she'd be great for this. And so that's how it kind of happened, is through that whole process.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
With that, these organizations that you're fostering, how is the community of women within because I feel like, you know, and I've been a mentor for women, like through She Runs It, things like that. And with International Women's Day, it's just been on my mind as of yesterday. You know, when you see, you know, women come to you just starting off in their careers in these organizations, trying to level up, like, what's your advice for them?
Yeah. So I have a couple. The first is, I often tell them that, one, I'm going to witness you. Your experience is valid. What you're feeling is valid. Every bit of rage that you have, every bit of anxiety that you have is valid, because we have been conditioned to feel this way. We have been conditioned to carry the emotional labor of the men that we work with, to be the one that's the note taker during a meeting. Why? All right. To be the one that's writing the procedural documents and processes. Why? Okay. Secretary. So a secretary. Exactly. So I see you, I witness you, everything that you are feeling is valid. So allow yourself to feel that anger, because that anger can be used as a tool for creativity. So an example of this is, I have a colleague that I mentor, and one of the things that we do is, like, she will get frustrated and she'll come to me and she'll be like, I'm really frustrated. And I'm like, lay it on me. Tell me everything that's going on. Lay it on me. And she'll lay it on me. And the first thing I'll say is, I can see why you feel that way. That makes sense that you feel that way. I would feel that way too. What are we going to do about it? And so then the conversation becomes shifting into creative ways of tackling it, right? So how can we tackle these situations in a creative way? Who is going to be our safe person in a room? If we're in a meeting and we're feeling like our voice isn't going to be heard, who in that room is going to be our safe person that we can then have a conversation with and say, hey, would you be willing to throw it my way? In my case, it was my boss. I was like, hey, could you throw this my way? If you see an opportunity where I can speak, and I'm not going to feel comfortable entering into this space because of all of these other things, can you throw it my way? Because you simply throwing it my way tells me that you believe in me and you have faith in me and you see me. And that gives me the strength and the empowerment to show up. So that's the first part of it. And then the second part of it is really about educating ourselves in our experience, the women's experience of how did we get to this point, right? Like, there's so many things that have happened, but how do we get to this point, and how do we get out of this point? And the way that we get out of it is by empowering each other. I can't tell you how many organizations I worked for before where there would be a female leader at the top, and then there are all other men. And the female leader, she has an opportunity as the leader to then empower the other women that are working underneath her to pave the way, but then they don't, because to them, they immediately get into the mindset of, no, I'm competing against these men. But really, that's why I created the Power in Numbers Collective, because it's not about you being the best at the top. It's about we are better together at the top. Yep. So get rid of this top-down mentality and start looking from the bottom up. Get rid of these triangles, these pyramids of hierarchical, power systems, and start looking at everything as a circle and start seeing everybody as equals to you and treating them with mutual respect and accountability. And if you do that, then you've got these whole groups of women who can come together and do amazing work together. And that's what GSD&M, I keep going back to GSD&M, but we do that. We have a women's ERG where we do that. We had, Bloody Mary misogyny last year where we petitioned against the pink tax, and amazing. It was fantastic. This year, we're working on a couple of different initiatives around, the experience of perimenopause and menopause and the experience of being that one woman in a room full of men, right? So we have these organizations of women who are coming together and lifting each other up. And then we're in these rooms where it's like, yeah, we could take the credit individually, or we can say, hey, we all did it together. Or, hey, she shined at this, she shined at this, and she shined at this. And we wouldn't have been able to do any of this without all of us doing it together.
So with being at South by Southwest, and it's an intersectionality of culture and music and tech and all of these things and inclusivity and kind of celebrating that, what's the biggest thing you want to take away from this weekend overall?
So this goes back to that unofficial guide that we put together. So last year, the software technology for South by Southwest didn't have the ability for you to search for panels related to LGBTQIA, DEIBA, Indigenous voices, Asian voices, Black voices. They didn't have any of that software. So that's why we had to create the calendar to make it so it was accessible to anyone who really only wanted to focus on those sessions. Here you go. We went through manually, searched all the different keywords we could possibly think of, and then created this Google Calendar that was also accessible because everything inside the Google Calendar could be read, so that if you were someone who, was visually impaired, you could still be able to access the auditory description of the panel and the location and get that guide, right? And then our call to action to South by Southwest was, hey, we would love if you guys updated your tagging system and the software. So then come this year, we went in and they did that. You've got tagging for LGBTQIA, you have tagging
within the app.
Exactly. Okay. You have tagging for Indigenous voices, Asian voices, Black voices, DEIBA, women, mental health. You have tagging for everything there. So now what I want to see is how many of those sessions are now going to be more readily attended? Because last year, I was one of maybe a couple in a lot of those sessions. Yeah. But now with the tagging software, I'm going to be curious to see, is there going to be more attendance at these events? And then if there's going to be more attendance at these events, that can communicate to the South by Southwest programmers, hey, there's a need for this. So looking into next year, let's increase the number of panels around the creativity and the advancement of advertising and technology and film and music from these unique voices, from the queer voices, from the DEIBA voices, the Asian voices, the Black voices, the Indigenous voices. Let's start having panels that are less about surviving and more about thriving. So that's what I'm going to be looking for is attendance this year in those.
Well, I can't wait to see.
I can't wait.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and everything you're doing for the community and at GSD&M. It's incredible to see. So thank you.
Chelsea. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you.